Hey everybody, Brett Tadlock, Tan Artist. I hope you're doing fantastic today. So we're going to try and do a little bit of a watercolor painting today, mainly because I haven't done one in a while. One of the reasons I don't tend to do too many of them while I'm recording these is because the watercolor engine's kind of demanding for processing power on my system, especially while I'm recording with my recording software. So they don't tend to like each other too much. But I'm really wanting to do some watercolor painting. So I'm going to try that. And we'll see how it goes. So I'm also using the recording a time lapse with Rebelle. I've got that going on over here in the other window. And so the palette, I'm going with the grayscale because I just want to kind of do a grayscale painting. I've got this kind of off bluish gray background with the watercolor paper. I've got the pigment turned on, and I'm going to use my watercolor brushes that I've made here, which patrons have access to. Majority of these are available through Gumroad if you don't have them, and some of these I've given to patrons as well. So between those two, they should pretty much have all of them. It's 8 by 10 inch paper, so I think that's roughly A4 if you're not in the US, and that's kind of it. So we're just going to use these colors right here and just kind of stick around through these and use them, and several different layers, and bounce around. So it's been a minute, so this will just be kind of playing around and experimenting and seeing how it goes. So hopefully we'll all have a good time with it. Alright, so the first brush I'm going to start with here is the grunge brush that I've got, and we're going to go with this kind of off white here. Just want to have a little bit of a kind of hint of clouds kind of in the background. So I'm just putting those in there and let that diffuse a little bit. Nothing too crazy. And then once I've got that in there, I'm going to go ahead and go to the blending brush. And I've got the soft selected. I'm going to use the right bracket to bring the size up and just kind of soften this out. That grunge brush tends to be kind of almost like a leaves a little bit of a salty kind of feel to the edges, but I just want to soften that out a little bit more. I just want that to be very subtle in the background. I don't even know how much that'll actually show up on the recording, but anyway, it's there, but it's very soft. Very, very soft. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to switch to my selection tool. I'm going to go to Add to Selection. I'm going to go to Freeform. And I'm going to, so you can see as this dries, see how it starts to kind of add in some of that stuff there, which is fine. I just kind of want it to fade off and have some of that there. To me, it adds some interest. It gets kind of a cool cloud kind of effect that way. All right, so anyway, I've got my selection tool here. And what I'm going to do is just in the background, I want there to be some mountains. So I'm just going to add some sharp peaks and bring this down to right about here. You'll notice too I've got the tilt just slightly tilted, so this would be the top that's tilted up, so everything's going to kind of run down this way towards the bottom, just very, very slightly. And I want to go with this kind of grayish color because we're going to try and put some atmospheric perspective back here, so everything off in the distance is going to be lighter and get a little bit darker as it moves towards us. And then we'll use some of the brighter colors to indicate light kind of streaming through. Alright, so let's go with maybe salty grunge and throw in some. Actually, I'm going to pause diffusion because that way it's not trying to constantly diffuse as I'm laying this in here. I'm just going to let this kind of do its thing. Put that in there. Okay. And maybe grab a little bit darker. And whereas I'm sticking with this palette here, I may click on it and go a little bit, stay within it, but, change it up as far as like getting a different value. Like if I want something that's more between these two or something like that, I might do that. I'm going to break that up a little bit differently and kind of go with a little bit more variation. Okay, something like that. Okay. And let's look at the water, how much water we've got there. We've got a decent amount. I'm going to do Shift Control I, and I'm going to dry the layer. So that dries this, but leaves this wet. Now I'm going to do Shift Control I to go back to my mountain layer. That way this is just wet, so I can affect this, and that's all dry. Okay. And I'm going to turn off the water. And let's unpause diffusion. And so that's because this paper's dry, it's just diffusing a little bit, kind of where it was overlapped. Okay. Now I'm going to go with this rough brush, and I'm going to select blend, and I'm going to just kind of some up and down motions here, just kind of encourage this here and there to get a little bit more of a control on it. And just kind of fade some of that out, because I want there to be texture here, but I don't want overly strong texture, because that'll start giving the indication of details, and details makes it look closer, so you don't want it to look really close. So you need this to kind of be more like shadows in the distance. So that's why I want to kind of smudge some of this together like this. So it doesn't really blur it per se, it just kind of blends it. Because if I blur it, then it's just going to look kind of weird and be out of focus, which, not necessarily a bad thing if you're trying to give that effect of, like, if you're something in the foreground, you want it to be really strong focus. But this I want to just look distant. So I want to keep some of the detail, but I don't want it to be crisp. I'm going to push F, and that's going to fast dry it. And that means it's not going to diffuse as much. Okay. Now one thing is I've got this up here where this kind of broke up from the other brush. This texture is a little too close to this texture, so we're going to go with Shift Control I. So now we've got this selected. I'm going to come back to my blending brush, and I'm just going to kind of swirl and soften that, because I want this to be softer and not look like rocks. I don't want it to mimic the texture of the rocks of the mountain. There we go. I think that works. Okay, so I'm going to do Control D. Now I'm going to go back to my brush that I just had. I'm still on blend. And I'm going to come down a little bit in size. And then just along the edge here, using little vertical strokes, I'm just going to kind of go along and break up that really crisp edge. And I want to kind of skip spots here and there. Kind of push some of this dark up here. And maybe kind of move it around. Like so. And the reason I'm doing this is I don't want this to look like it was cut out. You know, I don't want it to look cookie cutter. So by pushing this around, that's going to give me that same, it's going to give me a nice edge, but it's at the same time, it's going to make it not look like it was, you know, done with a selection tool. And you want to pick up, you know, kind of smear it, pick it up, skip over, pick it up, smear it, go back, pick it up, smear it, go back. And that just kind of helps add some randomness. Like that. And see how that kind of breaks it up and gives it a more organic feel to it. Like so. And I think that works. Alright, so let's make a new layer. Let's go with our trees. Okay. And we're going to come a little bit darker. We'll go with this layer here, this color. And for this one, just kind of come across. And that's a little dark. But the nice thing about this one is that this brush is very sensitive to pressure. And we can also change to the blending option, and that's going to let us go back over it and kind of start blending some of this around, and then let that do its thing since it's watercolor, and it'll kind of diffuse like so. And again, we can just kind of let it diffuse. And just kind of keep spreading out that watercolor. It's almost like we're adding water without adding water, but just kind of bringing it down and around. And the pigment will just kind of keep diffusing down through it because we've got the board tilted slightly. You can kind of push it up a little bit too, like so. And then just kind of come back around. I really like this brush. I think it turned out really well. Now that took on a little bit of a splotchy look because I thinned it out so much. Alright. not necessarily a bad thing. It just kind of depends on if you like it or not. If you want to change it, you can just do select preserve transparency or lock transparency, and then we can add a little bit of a little less water. And then come back and add in some splotches of pigment back to it. And that'll kind of smooth it back out. Which again, all in all, kind of a cool thing. And if you get it to where you kind of like it, don't be afraid to get it where you like it. What I like to do is, you'll see that D is diffuse it, so you can kind of hover over D and just push where you like it, and push D to pause it, and then you can just hit F to like it. Now you can also come back up here and hit the erase, lower your opacity, and take out some of that, like just erase back some of it. And that can give you kind of an interesting look, like so. And because it's the lock transparency is kind of there, it's not going to take out all of it. It's going to keep some of it. We can go ahead and turn that off, and then come back to the blending. Like so, and I'm going to hit F, go ahead and fast try it, hit D again to unpause diffusion. And I think that's going to give us kind of an interesting look, you know? That really kind of pulls that forward. Alright. And then I think I'm going to grab yeah, excuse me. Maybe this cloud. Just kind of, well, I can just go back over here. Lower this down. I just want to kind of soften this bottom a little bit. Just kind of come over it. I'm going to obliterate this center in a second. It's going to be hidden, but I want to just ever so slightly soften it in case some of it does show through. I've got a few other watercolor brushes hidden in here as well. Like my watercolor tree brush, that's actually in the other ones, but there's sea foam and stuff like that. Anyway, let me go back to here. Alright, so kind of soften those. Come back to here, kind of soften those. Change my opacity back up. You can even go to 3, which is 3 is kind of paint and blend. So you can add in I'm gonna undo that. Didn't like how it was looking. Alright. Alright. First try. Okay. So now we've got that. I think that'll work. Let's make a new layer. Now for this one, I want to grab this mountain horse. And we're going to lay in some. Let's see how dark this gets. Yeah, I think that'll work. Alright, I want to put a few trees. Like maybe right about here. So just draw a straight line down. And then maybe I can do it down here. And then just kind of scrub it in. Kind of show you how to do it. So these are really just kind of back and forth to get that look. And this mountain horse one, I like it because it gives you kind of this streaky kind of a feel anyway. It can make some really nice nettles looking things anyway. Like so. Something like that. But I'm kind of wanting this to be more of a narrow tree. Must have a random pixel over here somewhere. Something like that. And maybe back here, but smaller. Something like that, but I'm going to duplicate that. Bring it down just a little bit, maybe about 70. And then merge it down. So that makes it just a little bit darker than that. So it pulls it forward. And I'm going to duplicate it. Stretch it out a little bit. And make it a little squatter. Like so. And so you can do that. It's a great way to save time. If you want to use stencils, that's why I have them, because it's a great way to save time. So even for doing watercolor, it's a great way to kind of save time. You can just lay it in there real quick, let it do its thing. You can hit F, backspace to get rid of the stencil, T, like so. Lighten that ever so slightly, maybe down to like 85. Just a little too dark. really helps those trees kind of pop forward. Okay, so now I've got those. So now I can take and grab maybe even this stencil that I've used a decent amount in some other videos. Make a new layer. Push 4, smear it around a little bit. Push F, backspace, T. Kind of stretch it in. I like doing it this way in layers, so I can get kind of a feel for where I want it to sit and live. And then I can also duplicate it if I want. So if I want it to be just a little bit darker, something like that, and I can merge that down. And so I'm able to really start kind of building in some bushes and some trees and some forests. Like so. So then I can take all of these, because all of these are together, right? So I can select all those, merge them, and now I've got the midground. So I've got distant, like sky, distance, a little bit closer, kind of a midground. I could even grab, drop down a little bit in value. And I could grab one of the other stencils and pause diffusion and just quickly throw in a little bit of that, a little bit of that. Backspace, unpause it, pause it, quick dry it, 4, let it kind of play out a little bit. So I think that's, giving us kind of a cool little area there. So now we can just make another layer and think about, okay, how do we want to have set up for maybe some foreground trees? So one of the things I like to do is I can grab a stencil and I can invert it, and I can say, okay, let me drag it over here, zoom it out a little bit. I can turn off lock size ratio, maybe stretch it, rotate it, I can do another one, invert it. So I can take my stencils and lay them out and start getting a feel for how they might look. And see, the nice thing about these, trees, when you have a forest, there, a lot of the trees are going to be similar trees, and so I can use the stencils to start laying out where these are at, not worrying that these are going to be the exact same stencil at the moment, because I can come in later and tweak them and make them change, And so I can do that and not have to worry about, oh, that's a cookie cutter looking thing there. It's the exact same. It doesn't matter. I can come in and really play around with it. If that makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense what I'm saying. Basically I can come in and say, okay, well this stencil is basically that, but because those things repeat, well I can come in and draw in different limbs and change it. But the foundation's there to make it easier. So yeah, that really gives me kind of an idea of the layout of where stuff can be. So now all I have to do is make a new layer. And I'm going to pause diffusion. And it doesn't overly matter which one I choose. Go with any of these watercolor brushes. Let's go with mop. So put that in. Oops. Oops. So that kind of builds that up real quick. Okay. Alright, so that kind of builds that out real quick, and then what we can do is kind of break this up a little bit and take some, like, maybe salt grunge, put it on erase, really bring the bracket down, and just kind of, erase out some of these. You can actually just go to the eraser, like spatter. And erase through. Just some different highlights. It's like if you wanted to have just some, and this works really well if you're going to have color, it works a little bit better actually if you're going to have color versus just a black and white grayscale kind of thing. This is what I was meaning about coming in here and adding in just some different lines here and there. Just throwing me off. I was like, why is it disappearing? It's like, somehow it's still on erase. Fast try that real quick. So I just hit D and let it do just a little bit of diffusion, kind of take some of the edges off. Alright, so I'm going to switch this back to erase, and I'm just going to take out some of this through here because I want there to be just a little bit more of the mountain and stuff showing. That's a little too solid. Now, one thing I want to show you guys here in just a second, I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but you can take, if you've got a brush that you like, you can actually move it over to other brushes. So like, say for example, you've got a watercolor, a oil brush that you like, you can bring it over to watercolor and try it out. And I've done that with several brushes and use that as a starting point to get some really cool effects. So it's a great way to build your own brushes and play around with some brushes. So let me show you that here real quick. Alright, so there's a couple of them that I have. See, I think I have them in my... Do I have them over here? No? Okay. So some of these leaf and grass brushes that you guys should probably have. So I'm going to copy this brush preset and I'm going to come over to my watercolor and I'm going to paste it. Now I've got that in here, right? So now see, I can paste this in here and have a watercolor brush that paints grass. But then it starts kind of diffusing in with the other grass, with the other watercolor. Like so, see? And it can give me some really interesting effects as it blends in. Okay. So I'm gonna use that here in a second. So let's do that. Let's drop down to this one and bring that up. And I'm gonna select this just off white brush. Paint some of that in there. And I'm going to bring that tilt down a little bit, so I'm not getting quite as much tilt. So I want to kind of lay this in here and get some of that texture built up. Let that kind of diffuse a little bit. Alright, and a little bit of this white. And that kind of blurred out too much. Reduce the water down. Bring that up in size, get some really larger bits of grass in here. Maybe even come over top of this one. like so. Just kind of push that back a little bit. Kind of fade that in so that it ties that together. Kind of like that. So that gives us some of that shadow. And that starts kind of pulling some of that together. There we go. So, I think that's kind of a cool looking thing, but I want to do, now this is kind of the other thing I wanted to see about doing as well, is coming into one of my other brushes. Where did I put it? Yeah, bear with me just for a second. Oh, there it is. Copy. Take this up to here and come into this white, because I'm curious if we can use this to start adding in. And make this into kind of an interesting winter scene. So like if like maybe it's just kind of a snows hit, you know, maybe a late winter random snow kind of a thing. The interesting thing about this is that this kind of flows out instead of just a oil brush or something. It gives kind of an interesting blended look. At least I think so. You can take push 4 and just kind of soften it. Into some of these areas, and we can pull it down behind that one. So that way it's behind these front ones. But with it being the watercolor is a bit more transparent. So you can really kind of soften it back into the shadows. Keep some of that snowdrift kind of a feel. I think it's a kind of a cool way to get, just an interesting effect. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. What do you think? Do you like it? Does it give you an idea of how to do some stuff? And you can sit here and play around. Like so. Let's see how it kind of spreads out. It gives it that really kind of a cool, I don't know, it just makes it look wetter, kind of a wetter snow look and feel to it. So you can just kind of go in and add it. And just kind of throw it on here and there and let it do its thing. I just thought it might be a nice little surprise to kind of do with a little monochromatic painting, and then throw in this little interesting kind of way to look at doing snow or other stuff. Just something for you guys to think about. The nice thing is you can just kind of sit here and play around with it, and it really gives the indication of like some depth where there may be branches kind of diving back in on each other. And you can always go back in and take some of it out and erase it. And then smudge it back in. Now when you've got it here, for example, if you zoom in, you can come in with like a rough brush, no water, select your dark color again, and then just put your dark color back over top of it. So that way if you want a few kind of sticking out over it, you can. And the same with your grass. Some of these, maybe these little holes. And you can just kind of do the same over here with kind of push it back. You can come back here. Scratch out a few limbs and brushes and different things. Even come up here and put a few highlights. Just however much you want, and you can make it as, you know, as graphic as you want with this pen. So, you know, something like that. Maybe just a little bit of some more stuff here and there. You can even use this. Turn that way down. And you've got a little bit of snowfall. To turn it, enlarge it again. Add a little bit more because then it gives you some bigger ones. And just a few big flakes here and there. something like that. So, you know, just like a fun watercolor snowfall, playing around with monochrome kind of thing. But I hope I gave you some ideas and some things to play around with, you know. Like I said, this is one of those things that you can really just kind of have fun with, you know, and just enjoy. So it's a fun one to add color to. You can come back into it and add color. You can just go over top of it and add in some spots of color here and there if you wanted as well. And that would be kind of an interesting thing to do, you know. So, you know, just something to think about. Anyway, if you have any questions or comments, let me know. I hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.